23 years old, and you are very good at disappearing. Not literally, not yet. You disappear the way ordinary people disappear. You blend into crowds, you keep your head down, you answer questions with questions. You grew up in a mid-sized city in a country that doesn't matter to this story. You studied languages because they came easily to you. Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, French, not out of any grand ambition, but because learning how other people think felt more useful than anything else on the university curriculum. You run every morning, not for fitness, but because the quiet of empty streets before the world wakes up is the only time your mind slows down. You are not extraordinary. That, it turns out, is exactly what makes you valuable. The recruiter doesn't introduce himself as a recruiter. He sits next to you on a train from Brussels to Amsterdam and spends 40 minutes discussing a geopolitical crisis you'd written a paper on 3 years earlier. He quotes your arguments back to you almost verbatim. You don't ask how he read a paper you submitted to a seminar of 12 people. You don't ask his name. You already understand something is happening that operates outside the rules you've lived by. When he slides a card across the fold-down tray table, it has nothing on it except a phone number. He gets off at the next stop. You hold the card for the rest of the journey and feel for the first time in your life that the world has a layer you've never seen. You call the number 6 days later, not because you're impulsive, because you spent 6 days thinking through every possible angle and concluded that not calling was itself a choice, and a smaller one than calling. A voice tells you where to be and when you go. What follows is not a job interview. It is 18 months of the most methodical dismantling and reconstruction of a human being ever applied to someone who volunteered for it. They don't teach you to kill first. They teach you to think. Specifically, they teach you to think the way institutions think. Governments, intelligence agencies, criminal networks, corporate structures with black budgets. You learn how decisions get made several layers above where they appear to get made. You learn which problems are solved with money, which with information, and which with the permanent removal of a single point of failure. You are not told what organization you belong to. You are told once clearly that it has no name on any document anywhere in the world, that it receives funding through mechanisms that would take a forensic accountant 3 years to trace to a dead end, and that the people who direct it are themselves directed by priorities that predate any current administration. You are told this not to impress you. You are told this so you understand that when something goes wrong, there is no hierarchy to appeal to, no lawyer to call, no whistleblower protection. There is only the work, and then there is silence. The first assignment is surveillance. 18 days in Oslo following a logistics consultant who is 3 layers down, moving components for something that 12 people in 4 governments would very much like to stop moving. You don't touch him. You watch him, map his patterns, identify the 3 people he trusts, and write a report that you encrypt and transmit through a channel you will never use again. A week later, the logistics consultant dies in a car accident. You are in Lisbon by then, eating pastry and reading a newspaper in a language tourists assume you don't speak. You don't think about Oslo for a long time. When you do, you think about it the way a surgeon thinks about a patient who didn't survive, technically, analytically, cataloging what you could have observed faster, more precisely. The grief, if it is grief, goes somewhere very small and quiet inside you. You leave it there. Year 2, you take your first direct assignment. The target is a mid-ranking official in a country experiencing the kind of political instability that looks chaotic from outside and is perfectly organized from inside, organized by someone for someone toward an outcome that 3 or 4 major powers are simultaneously trying to prevent and exploit. The official is not innocent. You know this because you've spent 11 days building a picture of him that most people who've known him for decades couldn't construct. You know the account he uses that his own government doesn't know about. You know the meeting he took in a hotel in Geneva 14 months ago that set in motion the thing you've been sent to stop. You know the names of his children. You keep the names in a separate mental compartment sealed. They are not relevant to the work. You are precise about what is relevant. The method has to look natural. Not because anyone will investigate seriously. The people who sent you control the people who would investigate, but because natural deaths create no political incident, no martyr, no narrative. A man in poor health whose habits suggest cardiac risk dies in his sleep. There is no story. There is no disruption. There is only a gap in a network, and a network with a gap loses its function. You understand by now that you are not in the business of punishment. You are in the business of architecture. Specifically, the architecture of power, and the surgical removal of load-bearing elements that are bearing the wrong load. You are in and out in 72 hours. On the flight back, you eat a meal and watch a film and feel approximately nothing, which concerns you slightly, so you feel the concern for a while, and then put it away too. Year 4, you are what they call in internal communications. Communications you are not supposed to have seen but have, because reading things you're not supposed to read is simply part of how you stay alive. A Tier 1 asset. There are, you estimate, fewer than 30 people globally with your clearance level, your skill profile, and your operational history. You don't know who the others are. You suspect some of them are hunting each other on behalf of competing handlers, which means at some point someone may be sent for you. This is not paranoia, this is arithmetic. You have covered 3 continents. You have been a pharmaceutical sales representative, a documentary filmmaker, a shipping consultant, a mid-level EU bureaucrat, a visiting professor of comparative law. Each identity is lived, not performed. Real apartment, real receipts, real relationships shallow enough to maintain, and real enough to withstand scrutiny. The woman in Vienna who thinks you work in private equity has no idea that the 6 weeks you spent with her were the longest you'd stopped moving in 2 years, and that you almost didn't leave, and that leaving anyway was among the hardest decisions you've made for reasons that had nothing to do with strategy. You do not contact her. Contacting her would be dangerous to her, and the version of you she knew no longer exists anyway. The thing nobody tells you about this life, and nobody tells you anything, that's rather the point, is that the psychological weight is not in the acts. It is in the accumulation of information you cannot share, decisions you cannot explain, and a self that keeps bifurcating into the person doing the work and the person watching the person do the work. You are, in some technical sense, a highly functional human being. You sleep adequately. You eat well. You exercise. You maintain emotional equilibrium with a proficiency that would impress a therapist if you were the kind of person who could see a therapist. What you cannot do is live without the awareness, constant and low grade and precise as a tuning fork, that the life you are living could end in 3 ways. A mission that goes wrong, a handler who decides you know too much, or the slow erosion of the part of you that is still human enough to care which of those 3 it is. Year 6, the assignment that changes the geometry of everything. The target is not an official, not a logistics consultant, not a network node. The target is a man who built, over 20 years, a private intelligence apparatus so embedded in legitimate structures, financial, governmental, media, that extracting him from those structures cleanly is geometrically impossible. He is functionally too connected to eliminate without consequence, except someone has decided the consequence is now worth paying. You are given the assignment with less context than usual, which means the people above your handlers are involved, which means the political exposure is severe enough that layers of deniability are being stacked with unusual care. You are, in other words, being used to solve a problem that is too large for normal architecture. You are the solution to a failure of all other solutions. You spend 3 weeks on research before you move. You build the picture, his routines, his vulnerabilities, his trusted circle, and somewhere in week 2, you find something your handlers did not include in your brief. The man has a file, not a leverage file, not a blackmail archive, though he has those too. A specific file, carefully maintained, updated as recently as 4 months ago, containing operational details about 8 individuals whose profiles match yours. You go very still when you read this. You read it again. Then you understand that the man you have been sent to eliminate has spent years building insurance against exactly this kind of operation, and that the file exists somewhere you cannot reach before you complete the assignment, and that completing the assignment therefore creates a problem that does not resolve cleanly in any direction. You contact your handler through a channel you've never used. The response takes 11 hours, which is 8 hours longer than usual. When it comes, it is 3 words: proceed as planned. You sit with this for a long time. You think about what 3 words after 11 hours means in terms of the conversation that happened in those 11 hours, and who was in that conversation, and what was decided. You think about the 8 profiles in the file, and whether yours is among them, and whether the people who told you to proceed already know the answer to that. You think about the woman in Vienna. You think about the logistics consultant in Oslo, and the official in his apartment, and the quiet accumulated weight of years of work that was never for a country, or an ideology, or a principle you were told clearly enough to believe in, but for a structure so diffuse and self-protective that you cannot even identify what it would mean for it to win. You proceed, not because 3 words in 11 hours resolved your doubt, because the alternative, stepping off the board entirely, requires a plan, and making that plan requires time, and time requires the appearance of compliance. You have learned above everything that the most dangerous thing in this world is not an enemy who wants you dead. It is an employer who is deciding whether you are still useful. The operation takes 4 days. It goes cleanly. The man dies, and his death triggers the consequence that was deemed worth paying: a controlled, manageable disruption of 4 financial structures and 1 government coalition, all of which will resolve within 18 months in directions that benefit the interest your work has always ultimately served. You are professional enough to find this almost elegant. You are also now a person who has destroyed an insurance file built by a man who understood exactly what you are, and you have destroyed it for people who may have known it existed before they gave you the assignment. You are in a hotel room in a city you won't name, even to yourself. You have 3 clean identities, each with funds, each with a different exit route. You have a list of 8 things you need to verify in the next 48 hours to understand what your situation actually is. You have a handler who took 11 hours to tell you to proceed, and you are calculating with the same analytical precision you bring to every target what that person is doing right now. You don't feel fear exactly. Fear is for people who are surprised by danger. What you feel is closer to clarity, the particular cold focus of someone who has spent years operating in a world with no floor and has just looked down for the first time and is already figuring out where to put their foot. You order food, you eat it, you open your laptop and begin the first of 8 verifications. Outside the window, the city moves in its ordinary way. People with ordinary lives navigating ordinary problems, visible and continuous and legible to each other in ways you have not been legible to anyone for 6 years. You are the ghost assassin every government denies exists. Tonight, for the first time, you are trying to figure out whether you need to start denying it yourself. The work continues. It always continues. The only question now is whose work it is.